And so here we go. So welcome everybody. Thank you. Welcome back from our summer break. Wow, now I have my transcript on. I'm going to turn that off. I don't want to see what I'm saying. Welcome back from our summer break for this WDFW lunchtime seminar series. We're excited to have our first speaker of the fall, Mary Huff, who is our priority habitat and species program section manager, and she is let's see, she's in the Habitat Programs Ecosystem Services Division, and yeah, great, nice, diverse bio in the email. So she was a U.S. Army military officer and likes to bird. So very cool. Mary, thank you very much for speaking with us today. We're looking forward to your talk, and I'm gonna mute myself and turn it right now. So to turn the floor over to you.
Great, thanks, Neela. You can hear me okay? Okay. Well, hello, everybody. I recognize we have a number of internal staff to DFW here, and we also have a number of guests from outside the agency. So thank you to everyone for spending your lunchtime with us today. We hope this presentation will be informative and interesting. I'm not going to promise that it's high tech or that it has lots of cool pictures, but we had a lot of information we wanted to share with you. And so hopefully we found sort of a happy medium between not completely overwhelming you, but also leaving you hopefully looking for a little bit more. So here's the agenda for our presentation. I have about 25 substantive slides, a few transitional slides, and I believe the entire section is here with me today. I did not ask them to be prepared to speak, but I am looking forward to seeing their lovely faces at the end of the presentation, and certainly hope that they will be available to answer questions that I might not be able to do so. So kind of three parts to the presentation. We're going to talk a little bit about what the purpose of the Priority Habitats and Species Program is and our role within the agency. There's a little bit of history there. There's some very recent organization changes. And then we want to talk a little bit about where do we see the future for our program. And then we're going to really spend most of the presentation talking about what it is that we do. We have a mission statement that we'd like to share with you, talk about the different components of PHS, and then highlight some of the projects that we're currently working on. And we have a brand new hot off the press list of priority projects for the rest of the biennium, which I'm also excited to share. Then we want to make sure that you all know where to find our stuff and who we are, and we'll be saving time for questions and answers at the end. So, purpose and role within the agency. There's a lot of text on this slide. I apologize. There's over 30 years of history here to try to summarize. So I broke our PHS history down into kind of three phases. That first phase really started back in 1989, which some of you may not realize is actually prior to the merger of the Department of Fisheries and the Department of Wildlife into what is now the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. PHS was initially developed to answer questions raised by the Timber, Fish, and Wildlife, or TFW, process. But very shortly after the first PHS work plan was developed, the Growth Management Act passed in the spring of 1990, and that prompted a bunch of conversations about how to designate one of the 5 types of critical areas under GMA called Fish and Wildlife Habitat Conservation Areas, or FWHCAs. And also some really important questions about how to do critical areas protection in urban settings versus rural settings, because clearly there's differences there. And in terms of PHS, sort of I think of as outputs, really the big effort to develop those initial PHS spatial layers happened in those first few years. And then there was sort of the, I guess what I would call like the settling in period of PHS, which lasted a pretty significant amount of time, the mid-1990s until approximately 2009-10, essentially at the end of the Great Recession. We made updates to the PHS list pretty regularly, about every 2 to 5 years on average, and many of our PHS management recommendations were produced during that time frame. We also had dedicated staff who were referred to as PHS/GMA biologists in the habitat program in most of our 6 DFW regions. And so they were really the conduit between headquarters and the regions on sort of all things land use planning related. And we also participated in regular mapping parties with our regional staff, and that included our habitat biologist and also wildlife biologist and fish biologist to try to make sure that we kept our map information in PHS on the web up to date. More recently, as many of you know, our PHS has sort of been coasting a little bit, unfortunately. And there's some really good reasons for that. Again, at the end of the Great Recession, as a result of downsizing, and I know many of you have been with the state for decades and remember those times. I was not a state employee at that time, but I was on the outside trying to get in. So I remember furloughs and positions being cut. So we lost our PHS GMA biologist. That was one of the casualties of the Great Recession as we had to do some downsizing. And those of you who have been with agency a long time or working in the natural resources field may also know that we started a significant effort to update our PHS riparian ecosystems management recommendation back in the early 2010 decade. And that process ended up taking a lot longer than we thought it would for a variety of reasons. We just published our final management recommendations in December of last year. So that was a 8+ year solid effort to develop both the science document and our management recommendations. Our division was also heavily involved with helping to stand up the voluntary stewardship program that decade. And so our very small team, I essentially have 4 full-time staff and then 1 half-time staff who I share with the Wildlife Diversity Division. Those things were largely all-consuming as well as other agency priorities. Also, a couple of years ago when I was hired, there was a decision made to reorganize the PHS section within a more broad-looking land use conservation and policy section, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a few moments. So there's kind of been some shifting of how do we prioritize our work? How do we think about our work in relation to other land use planning work that the agency does? Now we are working on something exciting, I think, sort of kicking off our phase 4. And so this slide, which I have borrowed from my supervisor and probably should have made some changes to make it a little easier for you to see in this presentation, I apologize. But essentially what we have decided to do is separate out the PHS section from the land use conservation and policy section so that our team can really focus on both improving our existing PHS tools and also developing new ones. We have been trying to do that work in concert with the land use planning work, which is heavily focused on Growth Management Act, the Voluntary Stewardship Program, and Shoreline Management Act, which I will also talk a little bit more about in a moment. And it's really difficult to do both of those things well. And so we've made the decision with our new division manager, Tom O'Brien, to essentially separate those bodies of work out. They will never be completely separate. There will need to be a very close relationship between the PHS section and the Land Use Conservation and Policy, or a LUCP section moving forward. But I think that it's going to lead to better outcomes for our agency and for our engagement with external stakeholders, and most importantly for conservation outcomes on the ground. So this is a very recent change. You all are some of the first folks to hear that this is official. So we are looking forward to staffing up that land use conservation policy section. We don't have a staff there right now, but we will soon. We have a recruitment for an EP5, Environmental 5, out on the street right now to help us with some GMA climate-focused work, and also look forward to adding another EP4, Environmental Plan 4, to help us with Puget Sound partnership-focused land use planning work in the next couple of months. So a couple of years ago, we decided that we really wanted to try to confirm or affirm what the PHS program's purpose should be within the agency. And we were fortunate to have the support of all three of the resource programs, fish, wildlife, and habitat, to develop a disappearing task force within the agency. And really their charge was to come up with a vision and a mission for PHS. And so our vision statement is: all land use decisions made within the framework of Washington State's local jurisdictional authority align with DFW's conservation priorities for species and their habitats. So many of you may know that last year our agency published a new 25-year strategic plan, and there are we have 4 overarching strategies, and I'm going to highlight 2 areas one each under 2 of the strategies that are obviously related to PHS or that we believe are related to PHS. So our conservation strategy number 1 is to proactively address conservation challenges. And our strategic plan has a series of both near-term actions and long-term actions for each strategy. And the near-term action number 5 under this strategy is to ensure that land use planning and decisions are contributing to the conservation and recovery of fish and wildlife. And the bold emphasis there is mine. And one of the subtasks under that near-term action is to enhance the quality, quantity, and display of information within the PHS portal to ensure that land use planners have the appropriate scale and quality of information to make informed decisions. So we feel pretty excited that PHS was called out specifically in the strategic plan, and we are already taking steps to try to make some of these improvements at our level, and we look forward to working with our partners both within the agency and outside the agency to help us do more and do even better moving forward. Another one of our 4 agency strategies is to deliver science that informs Washington's most pressing fish and wildlife questions. And near-term action number 3 under that strategy is to develop an agency-level data management system to provide better science for agency decision-making and constituent outreach. And one of the subtasks there is to develop a system that allows for the intake and analysis of data across programs. And some of the projects that we have been working on for the last 6 to 9 months and continue to work on really are focusing on this right here, trying to do more cross-programmatic analysis and integration of information to deliver through PHS. So what is it that we do? I know I've thrown a lot of acronyms around. Some of you may be very familiar with those acronyms and others of you may not. So I'm going to touch a little bit more now on sort of the framework in which our program operates. So our mission statement, which also came out of that disappearing task force, was that PHS effectively communicates WDFW's conservation priorities via data-driven maps, guidance, and technical assistance to influence terrestrial and aquatic land use decisions such that priority habitats and species are protected and perpetuated. So as you can see, our DFW mandate to preserve, protect, and perpetuate species and ecosystems and to provide sustainable recreational and commercial opportunities is reflected in that mission statement. This is a very busy slide. I think it's the busiest one I have, and I'm just going to talk through this as quickly as I can. So we really have 2 target audiences in my mind. One of them is external and one is internal. Our external key target audience are local governments, and sometimes we refer to them as local jurisdictions, LGs or LJs, and really we're talking about counties, cities, and towns. And the reason is because that Washington State's land use planning framework is very grassroots driven. Essentially, the state has 3 major land use planning laws: the Growth Management Act, GMA, Voluntary Stewardship Program, VSP, and the Shoreline Management Act, SMA. And all of those laws have established requirements for local jurisdictions that they must follow based on guidance that the state provides. So under the Growth Management Act, all Washington jurisdictions, which there are over 250 of them, have a set of obligations. Some of them have more and some have less, but every jurisdiction must protect the 5 types of critical areas that are specified under GMA. And the one that we are most concerned about is that one I referred to earlier, the FWHCA, or Fish and Wildlife Habitat Conservation Areas. And importantly, one of the other 4 types of critical areas are wetlands. And we, of course, defer to the Department of Ecology, who has regulatory authority over wetlands for things that relate to the Clean Water Act. But wetlands are a type of priority habitat, and so we definitely pay special attention to those as well. The voluntary stewardship program is newer. It has only been around since, I think, 2013, 14-ish is when things sort of started to begin implementing. It establishes a baseline of July 2011, and it only affects counties that decided to opt in. There are 27 out of the 39 Washington state counties that opted into VSP. And what that does is it provides an alternative approach to critical areas protection that's required under the Growth Management Act, but only where agricultural activities occur. And VSP is a pretty complicated program. It's still relatively new. We could do a completely separate webinar about VSP, but just if you think about VSP as sort of an alternative to critical areas protection where agricultural activities occur and where counties have opted in, that's really kind of all you need to know at a high level. The third most important statute that affects the work that we do is the Shoreline Management Act, and that affects those jurisdictions which have shorelines of the state, and that essentially applies to the 200 feet area from the ordinary high water mark. And so essentially critical areas that are within the shoreline jurisdiction, the jurisdictional authority is under the Shoreline Management Act rather than the Growth Management Act. So that's a mouthful. And our internal audience is really our regional habitat biologists and other regional habitat program staff, to include our assistant regional habitat program managers and our regional habitat program managers. And the reason they're important is because they represent the agency in those local land use planning activities. They are the ones that are most often delivering that technical assistance, which our agency, that's our role under these 3 laws. We have no direct authority, but we provide technical assistance to local governments with implementing the requirements of these 3 acts. And our regional habitat biologists need to understand what is in PHS, why is it in PHS, and how does that information play out at a local scale, since the tools that we're developing are typically at the state level. So what is PHS? Well, we think of it as having 5 components. And in this slide, I tried to identify sort of what is the need or the purpose of the things that we do, and then what is the component that we use to deliver upon that need. So number 1 is a list of the agency's conservation priorities based on risk from land use decisions and activities. And so we have a PHS list, which I'll be talking a little bit more about on the next slide. Then we want to have sources of best available science, or BAS. That is a term that is specifically called out within Growth Management Act. Shoreline Management Act has something comparable. I believe it's best available scientific and technical information. And both of those laws require local jurisdictions to consider those sources. And so our sources of a best available science are about where critters are that are on the list and how they use the landscape. And we primarily deliver that information both externally and internally through our PHS on the Web app. Then we also want to provide science-based guidance about what actions are needed in order to achieve our agency's mandate for those species and habitats. And so we develop PHS Management Recommendations, or MRs for short, that essentially say, if you see that you have a species or a habitat in your area on the landscape, what should you do about it? And then, as I mentioned already, the assistance on how to provide our statewide guidance locally is delivered by our regional habitat biologists. And more recently, we've added a fifth component that really focuses on monitoring and adaptive management. And we are doing a lot of that work in conjunction with other state agencies, in particular Department of Commerce, which administers the Growth Management Act, and the Department of Ecology, which administers the Shoreline Management Act. And monitoring adaptive management is actually a required component under the Voluntary Stewardship Program. So we're also working with our partners at the State Conservation Commission, which administers VSP, and the other two state agencies that are represented on the VSP statewide technical panel, the Washington State Department of Agriculture and the Department of Ecology. So this is a cover of our current PHS list. It is a fairly lengthy document, which you can find on our website. There is established criteria for getting on the PHS list, and that applies to both species and habitats. And so once a species or a habitat is put on the PHS list, that then drives the rest of our work to develop and maintain spatial data and our management recommendations. So in other words, if a species or a habitat is not on the PHS list, we will not be focusing on providing information through PHS on the web or developing management recommendations for those other species and habitats. The last major update to the PHS list, when we actually looked at the criteria, was in 2008. That was, again, sort of at the end of that very active period, sort of in the middle of PHS's history, but we continue to make annual administrative updates, such as if species are added to or removed from the federal endangered species list or our state list. We then reflect that on the PHS list. So our spatial data consists of a couple of different things. The one which most of you are likely familiar with is our PHS on the web tool, and there's a screen capture of that homepage in the back. We have two different versions of PHS on the web, the external version and an internal version. The difference between those is that on the external version, there are certain species that are considered to have location data that is sensitive. And so we mask that to an appropriate level based on our sensitive data policy. Our internal PHS on the web has the masks removed so that our internal staff can actually see individual things such as sage-grouse lek sites that we would otherwise mask for the public because of threats to species. However, if you are an external customer and you require access to that sensitive data, you can request it. And so we have a process by which you essentially prepare a sensitive data sharing agreement with our agency. You request it through an order form that's online, and then we will provide that data to you if you meet the requirements. So that screen capture that's superimposed over the image is just from our PHS website. It says when the PHS report indicates a sensitive species, what does that mean, and how do you get the information if you need it? So these are two more screen captures from our PHS public-facing website. It shows a list of most of the management recommendations that we have published through the years. We're very much looking forward to adding to this list. Right now, we actually have only about let's see, of all the species that are on the PHS list, we have management recommendations for only about 60%, and our percentage for the habitats is actually even lower than that, and that's something that we're really going to be focusing on in the coming years. So now we're going to talk a little bit about current projects that we have underway. Hopefully most of you are already familiar with this first one. I mentioned previously that the agency has been working on an update to our PHS riparian ecosystem management recommendations for a number of years. In December of 2020, we published the final version. That photo in the upper right is the screen capture of the cover page. And in the lower left, you see another screen capture. That's our site potential, tree height, and riparian management zone mapping page. Right now, we don't have a link to that on our PHS on the web homepage, but that's something that we're working at doing. There's a variety of reasons why we do not show riparian ecosystems in PHS on the web. That could probably be a whole nother webinar, but we do have information about riparian ecosystems available through this other tool. And the screen capture in the lower right is just a zoomed in version in Snohomish County of what that site potential tree height and riparian mapping zone tool looks like at a more local scale. So we published the document last December, and we are really diving in right now to doing training for staff and outreach to external stakeholders. So more to follow on this, both for our internal DFW staff and our external partners who are here today. Our current project number 2 is one that we are just on the cusp of getting ready to release. We have spent most of the last year, honestly, working on updating our shrubstep and east side step habitat layer in PHS on the web. And this is the first comprehensive wall-to-wall depiction of likely habitat presence statewide that we will have in PHS on the web. So it represents a significant shift from the way that we have previously depicted most habitat information in PHS on the web, which was reflective of known survey data and some aerial imagery analysis that local habitat biologists were able to do sort of on an as needed, as able basis, which meant that we had really, really good data in some places and not very good data in other places. And we're really excited that this new layer will represent a, like I said, more comprehensive and more consistent depiction of where these two habitat types are likely to occur on the landscape. Our goal is to release this at the end of October. We're in the process of doing outreach right now, starting later this week to our local jurisdiction partners. But this information for internal staff is already available through one of our internal tools called the Habitat Program web app. So if you have questions about that internal staff, please let us know. That's something that we want you to see and become familiar with before we make it public. Our third current project that's a little bit farther behind, we're hoping that maybe in November we'll be ready to release this. So similar to what we did with the shrubstep layer, we're trying to get away from showing just information about priority habitats and species based on known survey data. And so this is really sort of our PHS pilot project, especially with the species focus. Virginis hawk, for those of you that don't know, was previously not listed at the state level. It is not listed at the federal level, and our staff recommended to our commission earlier this year, and the commission agreed to list this species at the state level as state endangered. So previously, we had just depicted points that indicated nest sites. And what we really need to do is to depict polygons that depict really the full use area of the species. And so this is based on some modeling and also best professional judgment of a group of very smart staff in our agency, both GIS and IT experts, but also species experts. And we are looking forward to replicating this project with other species in the coming years. So those are 3 projects that are already underway. I also wanted to share with you some of the other projects that we're looking forward to tackling between now and the end of the biennium. I want to be clear, this is not an exhaustive list. It doesn't mean that these are the only projects that we're going to be working on, and it doesn't mean that we will be both starting and finishing all of these projects in the current biennium, but these are ones that we have worked with regional staff and other headquarters staff and wildlife and fish programs to try to develop those things that are either low-hanging fruit or are at particular threat from development, or in the case of biodiversity areas and corridors, Obviously, connectivity is something that the agency and other stakeholders are becoming more and more concerned about, not just because of climate change, but certainly that's one of the reasons. And so we've identified this list of priorities. These are things that we intend to focus on between now and the end of the biennium. In some cases, it's really a spatial data focus. In other cases, it's either updating an existing management recommendation or developing one where we don't already have one in existence. So for example, Westside Prairie is a priority habitat, and we don't currently have a management recommendation focused on Westside Prairie. And there's 3 federally listed species that occupy Westside Prairie, and so we just feel like that's something that we need to address. And then in other cases, we're really just focusing on making technological improvements or changing other aspects of the user interface. So for example, the PHS list that I showed you the cover page of a few slides ago, right now the list itself is not just a list of species and habitats. It's what we sometimes refer to as a catalog. It goes into the criteria for getting on the PHS list. It provides some background information on all of the species and habitats. It provides a map showing which counties throughout the state those different species and habitats occur in. We're not going to do away with the catalog. We know that it's important, but we have often had requests for people that just want a list. Where's just a list of the species and habitats? And so we're going to be working with our public affairs partners and IT partners to create a standalone PHS list and also try to turn the information in the catalog into more web-based instead of a 100+ page PDF document. So just trying to make the information more accessible and link it to other information that's already on the DFW website that exists for many of these species and habitats. At the same time, we have other projects that we're working on that are not either solely belong or administered by the PHS program, but rely on both information that we maintain and the skills and abilities of our staff. So for example, Department of Ecology issues NPDES, National Pollution Discharge Elimination System permits every 5 years for application of aquatic pesticides, and that's both herbicides and things like mosquito control. And previously, we provided just a list that was issued with their permit of species and habitats and different water bodies throughout the state where species and habitats that were likely to be harmed by those chemicals when they were present in those water bodies at those vulnerable life stages. The problem was that information wasn't easily updatable once the permit was issued, nor was it really easy for us to go in and work with our regional staff to update labels or timing windows when the pesticides can or cannot be applied. And so about 1.5 years ago, Keith Folkerts and Terry Johnson and our team started working with Ecology, and they've developed this web app, which we continue to refine. And we are also working with Ecology to try to streamline the process by which we support Ecology in the issue of these permits and any determinations that they might be making about potential modifications to when pesticides can or cannot be applied, and also trying to streamline the process by which an applicator of one of these chemicals who may wish to request an exception to those timing windows, whether they contact us directly, whether they contact Ecology directly, and Ecology works with us. So a lot of work here. Again, this is not a PHS product per se, but many of the species that are considered sensitive in terms of effects from these chemicals are on the PHS list. And Terry Johnson has the skills and has spent a lot of time working on developing this plan with a lot of input from regional staff from all 3 resource programs. So we're going to continue to refine this moving forward. And to those of you who have helped us so far, thank you. Thank you very much. Another really important project is, as many of you know, alternative energy projects, in particular solar, but also wind, continue to be proposed in many areas of the state. And we as an agency, I think, are still struggling to figure out how do we best develop tools and information to help, first off, steer potential developers to areas that will have fewer and less significant impacts to priority habitats and species, but then also engage with them once they have settled on a site to make sure really that the needs of species and habitats are being considered and following the mitigation sequence, impacts avoided first, minimized to the extent they cannot be avoided, and then if mitigation is required, that mitigation is appropriate. So we have been asked and are excited to help other divisions in the agency, to include the Habitat Program, Energy, Water, and Major Projects Division, and also the Diversity Division and Wildlife Program, with trying to develop more tools to, again, help both our external customers and our internal staff support and engage in these conversations. So where do you find all of this stuff? So for our external audiences, if you go to our the WDFW website, you can this URL at the bottom directly, or you can use the search function and type in priority habitats and species, or you can look for that species and habitats tab at the top. And this is a screen capture of our PHS homepage, which we're also looking forward to making some updates to moving forward. As you can see, it asks you right off the bat, what is it that you're trying to find? And then it provides links to our subpages, the page with the PHS list, the PHS map information, and the management recommendations homepage. For internal audiences, our agency's intranet, you can just go directly to that search bar in the upper right-hand corner and type in PHS, and it will pop up with the PHS sections newly designed homepage, which so far looks a little bit like this. That yellow star there is not actually on the page. I added that for the presentation, but you can see we've listed our vision and our mission statement, and then over on the right, we provided links to both our PHS products and a link to the Voluntary Stewardship Program homepage on the State Conservation Commission website. We have an internal VSP team. So if you are looking for specific VSP information, please let Sean Williams, our internal VSP coordinator, or myself know, and we can hook you up with that. And then there's also a list down in the lower right for internal resources that includes a link to our Habitat Program web app, which I referred to earlier. You can also go to the GIS group's DFW Web Maps and Applications intranet site. And here you can find a link to a number of those other apps that I mentioned. Again, here's the Habitat Program web app on the far left. The PHS on the Web internal link is on the far right. And then if you scroll down on that page, you'll also find links to, for example, the Site Potential Tree Height and Riparian Management Zone mapping tool that I referenced earlier. So without further ado, I want to introduce the team. We be small, but we be mighty, as we like to say. So here they are. So Jeff Azarad is our part-time person, so to speak. He's a full-time DFW employee, but we share him with the Wildlife Diversity Division. Keith Volkerts, our Conservation Information Delivery Unit Supervisor. He supervises Lori Guggenmoos and Terry Johnson. They are really kind of our spatial data gurus. And then Sean Williams is our Voluntary Stewardship Program Coordinator. Sean and Jeff and Keith report to me. Terry and Lori report to Keith. And between us, let's see, Terry and Lori have been with the agency since before the merger. They both started with Department of Wildlife. Jeff has been with the agency, I think, close to 20 years now. Keith came to us from Kitsap County, where he did a bunch of local planning work and watershed recovery work. He's been with the agency, I believe, since 2013. And then Sean and I are kind of the newbies. I've been here about 2.5 years, and Sean as well. So this is us. I've listed our titles below our names. And without further ado, I want to wrap it up and see what questions you all may have for us.
Mary, thank you so much. That was a great talk, and especially nice to hear such a great overview of something I think a lot of us have heard about, but you know, you never quite know. So great information, deep and broad. So yeah, lots of time for questions. So people are welcome to either write questions in the comments, the conversation area, or you can raise your hand, and Barry or I will call on you, whatever works for people.
Nate Pamplin, please introduce yourself, since we have so many external friends here today, and then we're ready for your question. Thanks for being here.
Hey, nice job, Mary and Neela. Thanks for putting on these webinars. I'm the policy director for the department. Mary, could you, well, first off, I mean, 50% of land in Washington is under private ownership. So as far as the ability to effectuate our conservation mission, I mean, PHS is one of the most important tools we have as an agency. And you know, it's hard to influence local government and planning here. And I'm just wondering if you could give folks a quick synopsis of the case that happened in Chelan County involving the city of Wenatchee and mule deer winter range. I just think that's a nice case story of how this can be applied. I mean, we work in partnership the vast majority of our time, and then here's also an instance where it was pursued through litigation. Thanks.
That's a great question, Nate. And I am hoping that Amanda Barge or Carmen Andanegi might be here, because they know that situation so much better than I do. I will tap dance a little bit here to see if either of them are here able to join us. But let's see if I can recall that. You know what, Nate? Oh, there's Carmen. Yay, Carmen, rescue me. Please do a better job of explaining this than I can. Oh, you're on mute, Carmen. Please introduce yourself for our external partners.
I will. I said I was waiting to hear what you would say, Mary. Hello, everyone. I'm Carmen Andanegi. I'm the Habitat Program Manager for North Central Washington Region 2. And hi, Nate, how are you? So Amanda isn't on, and she's got most of the details in her head. As I get older, I have a harder time keeping everything in there. But yes, we had a project proposal, a land use action proposal in Chelan with the city of Chelan, and it was regarding a development at the upper edge of their urban growth area. So it was right at the edge of the urban growth area, and the uplands of if you're looking at Wenatchee and you see this big, beautiful hillside behind it, it's all shrubstep, and it's got fingers of forest coming down into it, but it's really dry. And it's mule deer, wearing mule deer habitat, really important. A lot of ownerships there in the Chelan Land Trust, the city of Wenatchee, Chelan PUD, and then Forest Service up at the top. And it's the development wanted to extend into an area that was still within the urban growth area, but was PHS and PHS's mule deer wearing habitat. That's why all that habitat is there. And so they have to do, according to Chelan County's regulatory critical area ordinance, they have to do a habitat management mitigation plan. And the habitat management mitigation plan that they developed, DFW is written into their code, has 14 days to review it. And there was and when we reviewed it, we pointed out that they had that wintering habitat and that they needed to protect that. And they weren't proposing any mitigation, and they were saying that it wasn't actually wintering habitat. So because we had that in PHS, and it is shrubstep habitat or wintering mule deer wearing habitat or whatever kind of PH habitat, by definition, because if it's just not reflected in PHS, as we know, since we haven't looked everywhere, then by definition it exists, and it certainly does exist up there. I mean, nobody could deny that. So we decided that this was the first test of that ordinance, and that we needed to set the record straight on that. And so we did, and we had a lot of the Attorney General's office support, which was really amazing. And we did win that appeal, and it was of the Habitat Management Mitigation Plan. And we did it with also 2 private parties. So it wasn't us alone. There were 2 private parties who were homeowners up there and had concerns as well about that. And so in that appeal, it was recognized that that this critical area ordinance is written, and it's really a well-written ordinance for Eastern Washington, and Chelan County is quite a strong supporter of ours as well. And that established firmly that when there is critical habitat, Fish and Wildlife habitat critical areas, and it's in code that it needs to be protected, minimized, mitigated for unavoidable impacts, that we do have standing, and that does have value. And so, I mean, it's a lot of work, is what we learned. It costs a lot of money to do that, but it was very forceful in our being able to also use that ordinance and the way it's written as examples to present to Douglas County and Okanagan County and Grant County. I mean, you've been with us on a lot of this, Mary, and it's been it's just really a great ordinance if anybody is looking for something like that. I wasn't here for the first half. I just got on like 5 minutes ago, so I don't know what you covered all, Mary, but so I apologize if I'm repeating myself. Did that help any, Nate?
That was great. Thanks. I just thought it was a nice case study and application of the importance of having this stuff kind of on the record and then it being utilized. But ideally, we're pursuing the partnerships at the front end, but in some instances, we can also pursue it through court.
And you bring up an issue that's worth mentioning here, which is that we didn't have the best and strongest relationship with the city of Wenatchee. And that's why this was missed early on. But because of the work that we had to do, and because of Amanda Barge, who's just an amazing help over here, she's the assistant habitat program manager. We have got an incredible working relationship with the city of Wenatchee now. So good things come from that. So it's never too late to start.
Thank you, Carmen. I would have totally not explained all of that in a helpful way. So I'm grateful that you were able to join us and step in and answer Nate's question. And I really appreciate your question, Nate. Thank you. Let's see. I see 2 hands up, and I'm not sure who was first. Shannon and who's the other person? Kenda or Neil, sorry, will you help me with that? Why don't we go with Shannon? And if you could look for the next person, that would be great.
Will do.
Hi, Shannonbrenner. I work with WDFW in camp right now, but that experience or the discussion about Chelan, I just wanted to share my experience when I was working at the city of Tacoma. I did a code update to put in development standards for the urban open space for that priority habitat. And from my experience, there weren't a lot of jurisdictions that had specific development standards to address impacts to urban open space. But the city, along with the fact that a lot of our urban open space had steep slopes on it, which was a safety issue with development, we really wanted to preserve those green belts along our shorelines. And I don't know if this is a role for WDFW or if it would be more of a Department of Commerce thing, but one of the things that struck me when I was trying to do that code update, and I don't know if Michelle Tierke is on here, but she helped. Thank you, Michelle, if you're here. She helped a lot with the city, and also Elizabeth Boxtiegel helped. But when we went before Planning Commission and our council, what struck me, and no disrespect to those gentlemen and people who were on those the Planning Commission and the council, but there was a lack of what I thought a lack of understanding of the GMA and the minimum standards that a local jurisdiction has to. meet. And we had a comment come back, that habitat was for the hinterlands, not for the cities. But our cities border our shorelines and they border the mouths of our streams where salmon still have to migrate. So that was kind of lost on them. And I don't know, when you're talking about reaching out and working with local jurisdictions, I feel like it needs to go beyond the planning staff and the biologists there, and somehow a direct communication or tapping in directly with the council and the planning commission. The people on those, I know they have a lot of duties, they have a lot of different backgrounds. So again, no disrespect, but I don't know that all of them really understand the minimum standards in the GMA for critical areas. And it was, a lot of people just felt like, especially in the city, there was no value. These were just places for vermin, crows, rats, So, and I just thought that was, I was really saddened to hear a plan. And this person who made that comment was a planner. And in talking with our planners at the city, there was this understanding that it also provided for help to manage stormwater, helped, all these other benefits you get from green belts, recreation, heat island effects, just the health of the community. And the planning commissioner who said that was a planner. And I just thought that was really sad. So I just wanted to put that out there.
I appreciate all that, Shannon. There's so many things you touched on there. I think, again, we could have a whole another webinar just talking about, engagement with local jurisdictions in planning. Briefly, I would say that I think one of the challenges before us is talking about maintaining habitats in urban areas. The Growth Management Act, and this is a very broad generalization, but the Growth Management Act is not an environmental law. That's not a broad generalization. That's a fact. It's not an environmental law. There are environmental protections in it, but it's really about, design, smart growth and planning for the needs of humans. And it recognizes the need for open space and the importance of biodiversity, but it is not an environmentally focused law. And so the way it was written, and remember, this was back in 1989-90, when our state looked very different than it does now, it really did kind of put the burden for maintenance of habitats in rural areas. And we just know now that's not enough. And we probably knew that at the time, but we really, really know that now. So I think that is a challenge that we need to spend some more time thinking about. And Keith just put a note in the chat, that we're working to draw clearer ties, I would say, between GMA's requirement to designate and protect critical areas and the products that we produce. And there's sort of a whole other conversation about that. GMA is not DFW's law. It's not ours to administer. We have a mandate, and we want to own our mandate and speak confidently about our mandate. But we also recognize that the more we can talk about the needs of fish and wildlife using the language and the jargon of the people that we're trying to influence, so in this case, planners, the more effective we're going to be. So we're looking at ways to try to tailor the delivery of our products in a way that we hope will be more accessible to those audiences.
We've had a question hand up for a while from Hugo Flores.
Yes, Hugo and I used to work together at DNR Aquatics.
Hey,
Hi,
Mary, how are you? Thank you.
Great. Thanks for
Great
joining
presentation. Us. Yeah. Thank you, Mary. I have a question. Do you know different agencies also keep data on different habitats? Do you have some kind of a coordination plan with other agencies, specifically, with DNR, with the eelgrass and kelp and other stuff? And also, to me, it's interesting when you develop recommendations for local governments, are they considered best available science?
Yeah, great question. So the first one is, I think that we definitely could do more to work with our other natural resource agency partners to share information and incorporate it and reflect it. So I don't know that we currently have a process by which we do that with really anyone other than the Natural Heritage Program at DNR, and that's something that I would love to work with DNR Aquatics more on. The second question about what is best available science. So that's a good one. I'll try to keep my answer short because I know we're running out of time. Our previous management recommendations have included both the science and the policy in one document. Our riparian ecosystems recent volumes that we published, we actually separated those out. We have a volume 1, which is the science synthesis and the management implications, and a volume 2, which is our management recommendations. And part of our outreach about those documents is that volume 1 is the best available science. Volume 2 in and of itself is not best available science. It's how we are recommending how to apply and interpret the best available science through the lens of our agency's mandate. So as a standalone document, it is not BAS. Volume 1 is BAS, but we're essentially saying, here's how we recommend you apply it in order to preserve, protect, and perpetuate species and habitats.
Great. Thank you, Mary.
You're welcome.
Mary, someone had a question about a link with more info on the VSP.
Sure. Yeah. Sean, why don't you put a link to the Commission's website in the chat? And why don't you put your email as well? And if folks have specific questions about VSP that are not answered there, please reach out to Sean. We just hired him about 10 months ago in this position to be a dedicated VSP staffer, and he's been amazing, and so fortunate to have him help us with our VSP engagement.
Okay, great, thanks. Oh, I guess maybe it was already there, but just in case. Last question, Bob Vadas, can you be quick because we have 2 minutes left and we want to respect people's time.
Yeah, I'll be quick. I'm just curious about the process for state listing species. How much of that is habitat versus wildlife?
I believe I believe the state listing process for wildlife is all wildlife program, but I don't know for sure. Bob, do we have any wildlife program staff here that could answer that with certainty?
Yeah, I can answer that. That's Jeff Azarad. So yeah, it's oh, and Hannah's here too. Yeah, it's the listing process is overseen by our, at least for the wildlife, our listing and recovery section. I'm not sure if that's still the name of the section, but it's a listing section, which is housed under the Wildlife Diversity Division. And obviously we coordinate with our partners in all the different programs and subject matter experts, but it's overseen through that listing section in the diversity division.
Thanks, Jeff, and thanks, Hannah, for being here, and thanks, Bob, for the good question.
Okay, great timing. We're going to wrap it up here. Thank you, Mary, so much. Thanks, everyone, for attending. Thank you for the questions, and great work, DFW.
Thank you, Neela, for planning and organizing this, and thanks to everyone who joined us today. Really appreciate your interest. Have a great rest of your day. And there's Keith.